All right, good morning. So here we are, January 2nd, and going to continue our journey with our daily devotions, working through the Psalms. And so today the reading is from Psalm chapter 2, verses 1. I just realized I didn't type that into my journal. Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. And so, let's just jump in. It says, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, 'Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles.' The one enthroned in heaven laughs and the Lord scoffs at them." And so, this is a psalm written probably by David being the king of Israel. And it's interesting because the Psalms are often David's diary. Perhaps you could say it like that. It's the way that he is processing the problems of his life. It's his prayer life, but he recorded it for us. And so we have to remember that most of David's kingship was defined by war. That David was a warrior and yet a worshiper. And so he was constantly in battle, constantly defending his borders, and constantly dealing with people rising up and trying to attack and take over Israel. And so he says in this prayer, why is this constantly happening? Why are these people constantly conspiring against God and against his anointed, speaking of himself and yet also pointing to Jesus? And even processing the thought of that in their hearts they say, "Let us break the chains and throw off the shackles." And so this is what David's dealing with. But remember that we use these psalms as a prayer, and we want to process them through the lens of our own hearts and souls. And what it really kind of just jumped out at me or caught my attention this morning is that he asked the question, why do the nations conspire, the people plot in vain, the kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed? And it just made me think that at least for myself, and I think that you can say in general for the human heart, that we have the tendency to want to rebel against what God has. And just in general, we just want to rebel. Like my kids, as we've been raising our kids, I've noticed that usually they're pretty good most of the time. But when I give them a rule or I give them direction not to do something, it's almost always guaranteed that they're going to do it. It's like the minute that the rule is in place, they rebel. Now, I think that having a framework and having rules is super important, because I think that without a framework, I remember someone saying that that freedom without a framework isn't liberty, but it's just simply anarchy. And that you and I need to have freedom within a proper framework. And so I think rules are important. But I think that's why Jesus comes and he fulfills the laws, because you and I can only relate to God in one of two ways. Either through rules or through relationship. And as long as we can relate to God through relationship, I know that for myself, understanding God as a loving God and a loving Father, it leads me to want to follow his way and not rebel against it. And so this prayer for me, it challenges me to examine my own heart and ask the question, where in my own heart am I rebelling against God? Where in my own heart am I plotting in vain? And it just gives me that challenge to examine what's going on the inside of my life, Because at the end of the day, God's the one who rules. He's the one who reigns. And at the end of the day, every knee will bow and tongue confess, like it says in the scriptures. And so I would rather now get my heart in line with that versus having to come to a place where it's done in that space, if that makes any sense. So I think that's the invitation, the challenge this morning for all of us is just simply, we all have tendencies, we all have places in our hearts where we want to rebel. And what does it look like for you to examine those places and to bring those places into the light of God and His grace, and just simply present those things before Him. And when we do that, His grace begins to rework it and to restore it. So hopefully that makes sense. That's the challenge this morning, is simply examining our hearts and asking, where is that rebellion inside of us, and just letting and submitting those things to God. So blessings to you guys. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you. See you tomorrow. Bye.